I sort of feel a complete fraud because I started off with the graduate, postgraduate session yesterday, sort of as a gentle introduction. So I sort of had an excuse for being sort of very non-specific and moving in sort of gently into the subject and saying nothing of great significance. Today I'm sort of the end of the afternoon and I sort of feel, can I do the same thing? Well, the bad news is I'm going to do almost exactly the same thing because I said yes to doing one presentation and discovered very late on that I had two presentations to give. So that put me in a great dilemma because ever since I've been married, I've found it very difficult to say no to anything. So I decided to do the software utilization and reuse philosophy. So there are a number of slides that I used in the presentation yesterday. So if you were at yesterday's presentation, take this as a bit of reinforcement of the points that I was making. If you weren't, well, ignore everything I've just said. This will be all new to you. So this was the title that I was asked to speak on. And it's becoming a bit of a habit now that I don't actually speak about what I'm asked to speak about. What I thought I would do is to talk a little bit about and give an update on the BIS strategy report that was done way back in October 2011. I'm not a great advocate of always harping back and saying, well, we said we were going to do X, and what have we actually achieved? If you get too hung up on that, you end up not really moving forward. So hopefully by going back and seeing what we have done, we'll see some differences between what we plan to do and what we are achieving, but hopefully look at some of the achievements. That's the good thing. I'm going to throw in some bad news and some real worries, and worries that I've got about the world and everything really. But some things that people within this room can help resolve, and other things which we can talk about in the bar. So the objectives really looking at the state of power electronics generally, a little bit of repetition from yesterday in that area, and review the progress against the objectives of the power electronics strategies. And really, it's been pretty much in a context of what it means to the UK. Now, a number of you here are not quite as parochial as others, but we're in a big industry. Power electronics is important to the UK. It's growing substantially, but it's about 100 billion impact on the UK economy. That's a lot. It's about 100,000 jobs. This is what we're projecting for 2020 with fairly modest growth. That's a big, well, both of those are big numbers. You know, and I think as a community, we haven't really had vision of that, those sorts of numbers before. Not saying they're absolutely precisely correct, but they're certainly the right orders of magnitude. And we're quite a powerful group, really. And we're going to grow quite substantially. But there just isn't enough of us. And it's one of my, well, I think that's my biggest concern. What I thought I was trying to do was to see what's actually happening in the world of power electronics. Again, I have sort of only modest confidence in this graph showing scale. Actually, the sale not of power electronics. This is actually the power semiconductor market. This is an estimate that was done last year by Yole, who are a consultancy looking at market data. It's actually predicting something like a 7% increase in sales, but the volume is actually going up more than that because price is coming down. So in terms of the volume of power electronics, it's probably going up by the order of about 10% a year, something of that order. And that's a pretty modest figure. I would have thought that was really fairly pessimistic. There are dips. A recent dip, 2009, where we'd been having decent, if not pretty good growth in most markets. Up to that, 2009 came, big drop. Everybody gets excited. There's overcapacity in the market. The semiconductor companies stop investing, and suddenly it comes back, and we're back on the high increase, and then we start worrying about shortages. But this is a booming market. The overall market is somewhere in the region of 135 billion pounds of pure power electronic equipment. The earlier figure I had for the UK was looking at the systems that were impacted as well. It's global, it's hugely competitive. Lots of big companies, all the big companies are involved. And in most instances, power electronics is recognised as being strategic. You've had the Obama quote in an earlier presentation, but you know, when Obama actually knows what power electronics is, that's really quite something. I've got another Obama quote, but I didn't even dare risk putting it in the quotations, but I've got about a 10-second clip that I just got yesterday, where with Obama saying that he trained as a lawyer and that's okay, but what we really need is engineers. Now, isn't that exciting? Yeah, will that make a difference? Well, hopefully. 78,000 engineers directly employed in power electronics in this country. 78,000. I'm going to come back to that figure. Because the really depressing thing is that there's an awful lot of them that are starting to look worn out like me. Grey hair, what there is left of it, and on their way out. In a presentation yesterday, didn't somebody say that there's, you know, I was in the second half. I was on the way out. Really depressing. I would love to be a young engineer just starting today with the opportunities and excitement. But there's an awful lot of people who are getting towards the rear end of their careers, who are working in here, and we've got a real problem in filling those the gaps that they're going to leave. Big market, and the UK is pretty good at this. We're pretty competent in a number of areas. You know, I can pick out numbers of areas of systems, you know, industries, applications, areas. The thing that I didn't realise until the last few years was how good we actually are at semiconductor devices. I sort of had a passing inkling that we had companies like ARM who were doing exciting things at the processor end. But even in power devices, it didn't really understand that what we had going on. Again, we got some big names. You know, we know companies like Rolls-Royce, Siemens, GE keep buying everything in sight. But there's other device, IQE, one of the world's leading companies in substrates. International Rectifier are doing lots of things. Lots of other companies who are world leading in their fields. We're in all sorts of areas of activity, from transportation, industrial, consumer goods, lots of areas of commercial activities from lighting through to building management. And Tim's just been talking about energy, and I'll talk a little bit of in that. Power electronics being enabling for an awful lot of those. I'm going to put 2 slides up on components. Not because I don't want this to be a great advert, but just some of the range of activity that of components that are actually being manufactured in the UK. You know, bipolar devices, up to 11,000 amps, 8,500 volts. You don't use a lot of those in some of the applications that we're going to be talking about. But these are big devices. We've got capacity, 1,000 4-inch wafers a year. That's an awful lot, 100,000, sorry, wafers a year. An awful lot of devices. 50,000 6-inch IGBT wafers. 100,000 high-power modules. Dynex going on in the UK. Found another manufacturer, Power Semiconductors, making 12 million die a week. But we don't make anything in the UK. This is big, big business. Universities, we've got some of the best universities around, and to have actually brought those together is a real plus for the for UK PLC. The reality is that many of them were working together before we had the Power Electronics Centre. But to actually have the opportunity to all get together at events like this is fantastic. And this is just a sample. Please don't get cross if I've missed your logo off. So the future's very, very bright. Very, very bright. Aerospace, I didn't know much about this, still don't know much about this, but I do know it's a huge opportunity. I know that the UK is extremely strong. I do know that power electronics is really transforming the whole aerospace industry. A couple of very basic slides that I've been lent. And the key thing is, for me, conventional civil passenger aircraft, about 175 kVA of electrical equipment on board. The more electric aircraft, going up to something like 1.4 MVA. And a huge proportion of that 1.4 MVA goes through power electronic conditioning of some form or another. It's only through innovation in the power electronics in terms of weight, volume, efficiency, that it's become a viable proposition. It's transforming this industry in many, many ways, but it's transforming it also as a home for power electronics. It's already a big area, but it's going to get much, much bigger. Tim's talked about transmission and distribution, and I thought it was quite interesting the comments that he and other speakers have made. This is an area where power electronics engineers and power systems engineers, who are different animals, really need to get together more. And that's really exactly the point that I'm making. As a non-power systems guy, I look across the fence and see huge opportunities. I showed this slide yesterday, and I think it's an important slide because it's something that, because I spent my life as an electrical engineer, I didn't really appreciate in the total energy mix of the UK that electricity is accounts for only about 18% of the final consumption. Gas, oil, petroleum are still big, big sectors. And that's going to change, I think. I think electricity is going to become much bigger, and power electronics is going to be at the heart of a lot of the the activity that goes on. I've not got a more up-to-date figure. I don't think DEC have actually produced anything since 2011. If they have, and you know about it, please let me know. So I think the whole energy mix, we can talk about the issues that there are within the electricity system, distribution and transmission. But I think the whole energy picture in the UK is going to change quite dramatically. I can't help, I just keep looking at this and looking, and I find, ever since I saw this not long ago, I just get so depressed by it. You know, how we can go from spending 700 million a year on research into, okay, I understand a big chunk of that's nuclear. But we suddenly decided that we weren't going to spend any money on research into energy. We had a bit of a blip. I think around here we had some jitters about climate change. We were going to start running out of power, so there was a blip, much of that driven by energy efficiency measures. We should be bitching about this kind of issue, and we are starting to see spending, so that's pretty good. As a consumer, I sort of really do worry that the lights could go out. I was talking to some guys from the electricity system operators, and they were, it was shortly after the North of Scotland grid collapsed in April. I hadn't actually noticed it. It hadn't registered on my radar at all. You know, my TV hadn't gone off. I could still boil kettles for my tea and coffee. But apparently the North of Scotland went. And what was interesting is that the group who were discussing this, and I was just sort of sat on a chair idly listening to them, were talking that apparently they didn't really know why it had collapsed. And more worryingly, they didn't really understand why it hadn't taken the whole UK grid down. So, yeah, I think it's just an example that we've got a grid system that is under stress, and it's getting worse. And for me, Tim's presentation was really timely. There's so much going on in this area. The impact of renewables is causing problems. We see issues now. I hear of issues just with council estates putting solar cells on all their housing in particular areas. Suddenly you've got lots of local generation. That's causing stability issues, over voltage and voltage control problems. And when we get moving on EVs and start having EV charging, and I'm sort of pretty optimistic that that's going to happen. We're going to have a whole host of other issues. But I'm a power electronics engineer. I don't understand power systems, but looking over the fence, I see these are problems, and I feel that we could help. But I do worry it's a problem in a sector where innovation is pretty slow. Getting them to take things on board. They'll do lots and lots of simulations and discussions, but actually really moving with innovation is going to be a bit of a challenge. Talked about smart grids. At last, people seem to be recognizing that whilst communications are an important part of smart grids, you're also going to need some invariably power electronic equipment that's actually going to do something with the data, do some control to handle the data. I've been so depressed by the presentations I've been to on smart grids. Well, I've been very excited, and all I've heard about is comms protocols and how we're going to gather data. And nobody seems to be that interested in well, what are we going to do with it? So it's a real opportunity. So pleased we've got Tim working on that. Renewables, another interesting bit of information I found is how much of it there is. Okay, it doesn't generate at peak output all the time, but we've got at the moment, and this at the moment was around March time, almost 14.5 gigawatts of renewable capacity in the UK. We got another 4 gigawatts in construction, another 14 gigawatts awaiting construction, people applying to install another 20. We've got a lot of renewable capacity. It's real. You know, no longer is windmills and solar cells sort of a bit of a Cinderella activity. There's a lot of it out there, and it's creating an awful lot of issues. Issues in sort of power systems, in terms of protection, location. And with this kind of thing, we've really got to start addressing the energy storage problem. What can we do to smooth out the peaks? Energy storage is another consultant's view that the energy storage market is globally is going to be worth 220 billion by 2021. That's a lot. It's not all going to be power electronics, but power electronics has got a role in there. I've just put in this car. I'm not going to talk about automotive. We've got a whole day about automotive, but I keep putting this up. It's a personal thing. My son works for Ricardo, and he's persuaded his mother that her next car is going to be one of these. It's a Golf GTE plug-in hybrid. And it's economic nonsense. But when your wife said, well, let's move on. There's huge opportunities in power electronics, but you know, can the UK actually play its part? Can it deliver? We had the strategy. Following on from that, we've established an organisation called Power Electronics UK. If you haven't heard of it, well, you've missed a number of things today, because we've got Mark's adopted the logo for the Centre for Power Electronics. And this thing was set up almost immediately after the report was published. It's a group made up of industry and academia. It's industry-led, and is in its constitution. We've got representatives not only from industry, large companies, and a number of SMEs are involved in the steering group of that. BIS are actively involved, helping us, supporting us, pointing us in the right direction. We've got NMI, who are doing a fantastic job in coordinating, bringing that all together. EPSRC, Technology Strategy Board, also involved, listening to what we are doing, listening to what we're asking for, and helping us. KTN, UK Trade and Investment. So we're talking with an awful lot of people who can help make a difference. And we're already got a number of successes. The IET are helping us, getting involved. I'm working myself with the IET on a new technical and professional network for power electronics machines and drives. We'll be letting you all know about that in the coming months. Engineering UK, Royal Academy of Engineering. We're working with them, with the IET, with NMI through and ESCO, the Electronics Foundation, looking at how we can address make some sort of impact on skills. And I'll come back to skills shortly. We've actually got 6 strands of activity within Power Electronics UK, working at skills, building the community, supporting academia, market-driven innovation, and then investment really in Power Electronics and in Power Electronics UK and internationally. Put together, hopefully you're all aware of Power Electronics UK Capability Directory. This was published in paper form in 2012, but now exists on the web. And it's a listing of industrial companies and universities and trade organisations who are involved one way or another in power electronics. It's useful just as a list if you want, either to find out different companies or to find a contact. Each listed organisation has a contact name, email, phone number, so you can hopefully make contact. And we're working with NMI's help on a version of this for UK universities as to what's going on there, what contacts to try and what research is going on to try and make the link into universities that much easier. Within Power Electronics, we've produced a number of, I suppose, what I've chosen to call position papers, detailing really the strategy and the tactics associated with each of the strands of activity that we've got on. These are all available on the Power Electronics UK website. So things are going great, but we've got a problem. I'm not going to say, is there a problem? There is a problem. This was published in the original strategy document, and that's really depressing. This is the number of UK students accepting degree places. So it's UK domiciled engineers. Between 2002 2010, we had a 41% drop in people going into UK universities to study electrical engineering. Mechanical engineering, it wasn't a glorious rise, but it was a pretty steady one. Civil engineering, they had a bit of a rise. Electrical engineering wasn't all that successful. And we've got to ask ourselves why. But before we ask ourselves why, let's get even more depressed and see if anything's changed since 2010. Well, this is not quite the same base. The numbers are bigger. This is the total number of students going on to accepted onto UK degree courses from 2008 2013. Steady rise in mechanicals. Electricals, if we're being generous, we're going to say it's flat. But in a true British spirit, things aren't all that bad, because at least civils are worse than we are. If we look at the UK, this is the true comparison with the first slide I showed. It really mirrors. This is a UK domiciled students going to UK universities, mechanical going up pretty nicely. Electrical, dip in 2012. I think this is the year that there was a bit of a rise in 2011. I think that was the year that grants came in 2012. Is that right? That's what, in my own mind, that's what's happened here. People didn't have a gap year, went into to avoid paying, so it went up. Numbers went up. We're not making great progress. Should we get even more depressed? If you look at this number, this is now a power electronics engineer is not an electrical and electronic engineer. It's not a subset of electrical and electronic. You know, there are lots of power electronics engineers who are mechanical engineers, software engineers, so forth. So don't read directly from this electrical and electronic number. But if we look at the number of people we've got at the moment, just look at who's going to retire. Forget dramatic growth of, you get people like me standing up saying that power electronics is going to grow at 10% a year. Forget all of that. Just to replace the people like me who are going to just get too old and fade away. We're going to need something like 1,800 graduates a year by 2020. Just look at these numbers. They're not all going to go into power electronics. We've got a real problem. Shall we get even more depressed? Somebody hasn't been doing their job. Because this is the number, the national statistics in the UK for 18-year-olds, the age where most people go to university. 2014, we've got about 775,000 18-year-olds. It's going down. It's going down. 2020, we're down to 700,000. So we're going to get a smaller number of people who are going to be in the age group, typical age group, to go to university. We've got a booming demand. Well, we've got a demand that we just need to start moving to fill. And everything's really working against us. And if we look at the previous slides, things are not getting fantastically better. But we've all got a role in that. I think there's some, we've got a role. I'm not suggesting we all have a role in correcting this. It's too late, guys. But we have a role in how can we attract and work to attract students into engineering. And it all goes back, yes, to schools and so forth. We're working within Power Electronics UK, with ESCO, with Engineering UK, Royal Academy of Engineering, IET, IMechE, trying to have some sort of impact in schools. But we can all do things in terms of projecting the image of engineering. Jeff Haynes has been doing a number of things in the last couple of days with taking video clips and so forth. Anything like that that starts sort of projecting that engineers are normal-ish is really helpful in moving things forward. But I think the centre has a role as well, that we can be presenting. Power electronics is an exciting thing. There are exciting things actually going on. But let's not get too depressed. This is not just a UK thing. I was speaking to Johan before he left, and I said I was going to do what I did yesterday, but add a bit about this. Exactly the same problem in Switzerland. It's the same problem just about everywhere. Just about. Not everywhere. Okay, let's get a little less depressed. So we are doing stuff. I'm spending more time in actually quantifying what the skills gap really is, trying to look at different disciplines, look at different industries as to what we can do. We're working to assist, but we're not starting up something radically new. The problems at schools, we want to support other people in what they're actually doing. We're also looking to see what is happening with alternative routes to becoming professional engineers. Apprentices, what does that have as an impact to, as a route to degree level qualifications? In universities, we're trying to support undergraduate programs, support on curriculum, support on sponsorship. Anything that we can do for industrial companies, the writing is on the wall. It is going to get tougher to recruit. We can look at sponsorship. Whether you do sponsorship or not, it's going to be a smaller pool. For me, one of the great things that's going to happen is starting salaries are going to go up. hooray, I say, because that's one self-inflicted issue in the UK. The UK is somewhat unusual that it has modest starting salaries and then very high ramp rates. In a lot of other countries, notably the States, it's a much higher starting salary on graduation and a more modest ramp rate. So we're not talking about just moving everybody's salaries up, but I think that's inevitably going to happen. And we're seeing evidence of it already. There is becoming greater discrepancies or differences between different employers and what they're offering for starting salaries. We're working with the Power Electronics Centre, trying to help them in terms of funding for postgraduate places. And we're looking at how can we work on things like CPD, providing networking, working with companies like and organisations like NMI, the KTNs, all the other organisations who are doing things in the power electronics space. And we're looking at setting up this power electronics machines and drives community within the IET. And the IET are giving us money to do that, so that's got to be good news. In terms of we're doing, I'll move on. We've talked about that before. International investment. Power Electronics UK is actually working with UK Trade and Investment and others to see if we can get together a power electronics promotional data pack. We want to see if we can do things to twofold. Sounds a little bit daft that we haven't got enough people to feed the UK's power electronics community, so let's try and get some more companies to come into the UK. Sounds a little bit perverse. But one of the issues that we've got is that there's pressure on quite a number of multinationals to move out of the UK. You haven't got enough people. You're having difficulty recruiting, so just move the whole damn lot to country X. And we are desperately working to show what a great place it is to do power electronics in the UK. And UK TI are helping us with that. And also working on the visa problem that a lot of companies are experiencing. If we can't get our own graduates, can we bring in graduates from overseas, experienced engineers who can impact our business as well? So, and also for overseas students who are graduated from our course, the ability to stay and work for a period in the UK. So there's things that are going on there. Final observation, really, I think we all know this. Power electronics is cross-sector. We also know it's very fragmented. And this was my world for probably 25, 30 years. I lived in one of those. And since I sort of climbed out of the top, it's one, well, I've just had a ball, really. It's been really interesting looking at what is going on across other sectors and in other areas. And feeling a bit, the one depressing thing is I wish I'd done it 20 years ago to actually see what could I learn from other people in other sectors. And I think the modern society, modern engineering culture, modern scale of things has sort of worked against us. If I think about things like specialist conferences, journals, everything's become so specialised. And it's very difficult to go and, if I was working as I was in industrial drives, I'd go to a conference and I'd go to the industrial drives stream. Even if there was automotive going on in the next room, I'd go to the drives bit. I don't do that anymore. I go to the aerospace or the automotive or the lighting. Maybe I could could learn a lot in the drive section, but I'm learning a huge amount in these other areas. And somehow we've got to break those silos down, give opportunities to actually see what's going on. We've got to make sure that when I talk about power electronics maturity, that it can be mature in some industries, in some sectors. We've just got to make sure we learn and transfer knowledge from one sector to another. And I think I've seen a number of issues, things like EMC, where in some sectors they're just not reinventing the world. But the learning from some sectors, it's not being applied. It can't be applied directly, but if you knew it's a better starting point than starting from a blank sheet of paper, often. And I think vocabulary can be a tremendous issue. It's amazing. The same thing can be called something totally different in different sectors. But that's probably a bit too much. Let's finish on something positive. Since we launched this strategy, Mark's already done some of these in the opening sentence. We've got EPSRC, bless them, 44 million we've had in establishing the Power Electronics Centre, the capital fund that Mark talked about, and we've also had other funding, including what Ian's talked about. But that's a lot of cash. TSB, 19 million. We've got the capability directory. Look at it. Put your own company on it. You can do it online. It's dead easy. Technology roadmaps are being developed to try to guide the activities of the centre here. We're trying to coordinate skills activity with other engineering organisations, trying to formulate what the needs of the power electronics industry is. We're actually working on some small, medium enterprise company, particular specific issues related to supply chains. How can they get their small things into larger organisation? We're forming this community. Well, it's moved on from this. It's actually going to be a professional network within the IET. And I think we can say that the needs of power electronics is being heard at government level. We are interfacing directly with government through Power Electronics UK now at different levels. And we're really getting some very, very positive responses. So I hope that was not quite as bad as you were anticipating it would be. It's going to get better.